Stop for a moment and imagine viewing your life from a distance. Not through emotion, not through excuses, not through the stories you repeat to yourself every day. Just observation. Watch the patterns carefully. Notice how your mornings begin before your mind is fully awake. The same routines, the same thoughts, the same impulses are guiding your actions almost automatically. Most people believe they are actively shaping their lives. But if you look closely, much of what feels like choice is actually repetition. The Stoics warned about this long ago. They understood that the greatest danger was not pain, failure, or hardship. It was unconscious living. Because once a pattern becomes familiar, it disappears into the mind's background. It stops being questioned. And the moment something stops being questioned, it quietly begins controlling you. That control rarely feels forceful. It feels comfortable, predictable, reasonable. And that is precisely why it is dangerous. People spend years defending routines they never consciously chose. Not because they lack intelligence or strength, but because habit becomes invisible when repeated enough times. You wake up at the same hour, consume the same distractions, react emotionally in the same ways, avoid the same fears, repeat the same internal narratives. Eventually, these behaviors stop feeling like actions and begin feeling like identity. You no longer say, "This is what I repeatedly do." You say, "This is who I am." And once identity forms around repetition, change begins to feel threatening. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." Every repeated thought leaves an imprint. Every repeated reaction strengthens a structure within the mind. Over time, those structures become the architecture of your life. And yet most of them were never consciously built. The limits you accept, the risks you avoid, the possibilities you dismiss before attempting. Many were inherited quietly from the environment around you, from childhood observations, from social expectations, from repeated reactions, from watching what others feared, tolerated, or accepted. No one explicitly announced these limits as laws, but repetition gave them authority, and authority repeated long enough becomes indistinguishable from truth. Epictetus once said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." But most people reverse the order. They repeat unconscious behaviors for years, and then allow those behaviors to define who they believe themselves to be. Habit creates identity. Identity creates limitation. And limitation, when reinforced consistently, begins to feel permanent. This is how people slowly become trapped inside lives they never deliberately designed. Not through dramatic failure, but through passive repetition. The process is subtle. Life rarely collapses all at once. It fragments quietly. A few wasted minutes become hours. Hours become months. Months become years. Attention drifts toward distractions so often that distraction itself becomes the default condition of the mind. Carl Jung once observed, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That is the tragedy of unconscious living. People call it fate when in reality it is conditioning. They call it personality when it is often repetition. They call it reality when it may simply be inherited perception. Attention is one of the most powerful forces in human existence because attention determines direction. Where attention goes, life follows. If your attention is constantly consumed by noise, comparison, entertainment, trivial concerns, and endless stimulation, then your inner world begins reflecting those same fragmented patterns. The mind loses depth. Patience weakens. Clarity dissolves. And eventually, a person can remain constantly occupied while accomplishing almost nothing meaningful. The Stoics understood that freedom begins internally. Not freedom from circumstance, but freedom from unconscious reaction. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Self-mastery begins with awareness. Awareness of thought, awareness of impulse, awareness of habit. Because what remains unconscious continues controlling behavior invisibly. Look carefully at modern life. Constant notifications, endless scrolling, shallow stimulation, fragmented focus. Each interruption appears harmless by itself, but repeated often enough, distraction reshapes the structure of attention itself. A distracted mind struggles to sustain effort. A distracted mind struggles to think deeply. A distracted mind loses the ability to remain present with difficulty, and difficulty is essential for growth. This is why comfort becomes dangerous when left unexamined. Comfort feels safe, but excessive comfort slowly weakens the mind. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." The Stoics did not avoid hardship because they understood something most people resist. Strength is developed through resistance. Discipline is built through friction. Clarity emerges through challenge. Without difficulty, the mind becomes fragile. When every inconvenience is avoided, even small obstacles begin to feel overwhelming. Comfort narrows resilience quietly. It lowers tolerance for uncertainty. It reduces willingness to struggle. It convinces the mind that ease is the natural goal of life. But ease alone has never created greatness. Seneca wrote, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials." Every challenge faced consciously expands capability. Every challenge avoided reinforces fear. This is why stagnation often feels comfortable at first. It asks nothing of you. No uncertainty, no discomfort, no risk of failure. But beneath that comfort, something dangerous begins happening. Potential slowly contracts. The mind adapts to safety so thoroughly that growth itself begins feeling threatening. People start avoiding not only discomfort, but also the possibility. And because the process happens gradually, they rarely notice it. The human mind naturally seeks familiarity. What is repeated becomes normal. What is normal becomes accepted. What is accepted stops being questioned. This applies not only to habits, but to identity itself. Identity is rarely as fixed as people believe. Most identities are constructed through repetition. Repeated behaviors, repeated emotions, repeated assumptions, repeated stories about oneself. Over time, these repetitions create the illusion of permanence. People say, "This is just who I am. I've always been this way. That's not something I can do." But many of these statements are not true. They are conclusions formed through repeated conditioning. The Stoics challenged this directly. They believed the self was shaped through deliberate action, not passive inheritance. Every repeated choice either strengthens freedom or strengthens unconscious limitation. And this is where awareness becomes transformative. The moment you begin observing your own patterns honestly, something changes. You begin noticing how often reactions occur automatically. How often are decisions shaped by fear of discomfort? How often attention is surrendered unconsciously? And once something becomes visible, it loses some of its power. This does not create instant freedom, but it creates a possibility. Because awareness introduces space between impulse and action. Within that space, choice becomes possible. Not a theoretical choice. Real choice. The ability to pause before reacting. The ability to question inherited assumptions. The ability to resist automatic behaviors. The ability to direct attention intentionally. This is the foundation of self-mastery. Not perfection, not constant productivity, but conscious direction. The Stoics understood that external events cannot always be controlled, but internal responses can be cultivated deliberately. That cultivation happens daily, in small decisions, small disciplines, small interruptions of unconscious behavior. Every moment you reclaim your attention strengthens autonomy. Every moment you resist distraction strengthens clarity. Every deliberate action weakens passive conditioning. And over time, those moments accumulate. Just as unconscious patterns were built through repetition, conscious living is built through repetition, too. A person does not transform through one dramatic realization. Transformation occurs through consistent awareness practiced repeatedly. One intentional decision at a time. One reclaimed moment at a time. One interruption of unconscious habit at a time. This is why the Stoics emphasized reflection so heavily. Because without reflection, the mind drifts toward whatever environmental conditions it most strongly. The environment matters more than most people realize. The people around you. The standards surrounding you. The conversations are repeated daily. The expectations are normalized by culture. All of these shape perception quietly. If limitation surrounds you consistently, limitation begins to feel reasonable. If distraction dominates your environment, focus begins to feel unnatural. If mediocrity becomes normal, ambition starts appearing excessive. Human beings absorb far more than they consciously notice, and repeated exposure becomes internal belief. This is why deliberate awareness of the environment is essential. Not because external influences completely determine your life, but because unconscious exposure shapes thinking gradually. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Be like the cliff against which the waves continually break." The waves are external influences. The cliff is disciplined awareness. Without awareness, people absorb the emotional and psychological currents around them automatically. With awareness, they begin consciously choosing what enters the mind and what does not. That distinction changes everything. Because eventually, perception shapes behavior. Behavior shapes identity. Identity shapes destiny. And destiny itself becomes the accumulated result of repeated choices. The deeper truth is this: most limitations are reinforced internally long before they exist externally. People often surrender before they even attempt. They imagine failure before taking action. They predict rejection before speaking. They assume incapability before testing themselves. Seneca observed, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." The imagined outcome becomes more powerful than reality itself. And imagination shaped by fear creates invisible prisons. This is why courage matters. Not dramatic courage, not reckless courage, but the quiet courage to confront your own conditioning honestly. The courage to question familiar patterns. The courage to tolerate discomfort. The courage to step beyond inherited identity. Because growth always feels unfamiliar at first. The mind resists uncertainty instinctively. Yet everything meaningful exists beyond the boundaries of passive familiarity. A life directed unconsciously eventually feels repetitive because repetition without awareness creates stagnation. But awareness changes the structure entirely. Suddenly, moments that once passed automatically become visible. You notice impulses before obeying them. You notice distractions before surrendering attention. You notice emotional reactions before becoming consumed by them. And slowly, deliberate living replaces passive drifting. This is the essence of Stoic practice. Not emotional suppression, not cold detachment, but conscious participation in your own existence. To live deliberately, to think clearly, to act intentionally, to stop surrendering life to unconscious patterns. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That strength is not physical dominance. It is internal steadiness. The ability to remain directed amidst distraction. The ability to remain disciplined amidst comfort. The ability to remain conscious amidst unconscious repetition. And that ability changes the trajectory of an entire life. Because once awareness deepens, passive living becomes impossible to ignore. You begin recognizing how much of life is shaped by repeated attention. You understand that every thought entertained repeatedly influences perception. Every habit practiced repeatedly influences identity. Every distraction accepted repeatedly influences destiny. And eventually, you realize something profoundly liberating. What has been conditioned can also be reconditioned. The mind can be trained. Attention can be reclaimed. Identity can be reshaped. Habits can be interrupted. But only through conscious repetition. Not through motivation alone. Not through temporary inspiration. Through disciplined awareness, practiced consistently. This is why self-mastery is never a final destination. It is an ongoing process of observation, correction, refinement, and deliberate action. A continuous return to awareness. A continuous refusal to drift unconsciously. A continuous effort to align life with principle rather than impulse. And perhaps that is the deeper Stoic lesson. Freedom is not found in controlling the world. Freedom is found in no longer being controlled unconsciously by yourself. So observe carefully. Question honestly. Protect your attention deliberately. Challenge comfort regularly. And remember that every moment of awareness weakens the structures that once operated invisibly within you. Because the quality of your life is shaped by what you repeatedly allow into your mind. And the moment you begin choosing consciously, the direction of your entire existence begins to change.